or try to explain everything, your emotional reaction becomes their fuel. It reassures them that they still hold influence. But the moment you become silent, you break the circuit. It is an action that carries immense power. By going silent, you sever the invisible line that kept you linked to their chaos. And in doing so, you begin to take back your own self. This type of silence is far from passive. It's not the silence of avoidance or total defeat. It is the silence of someone who has finally fundamentally understood their own value. It's the quiet choice of someone who has suffered through enough lies, enough gaslighting, enough emotional blackmail, and enough empty apologies. It is the profound silence of someone who has seen the truth clearly and chooses, with full clarity, not to get involved anymore. This specific choice is not cruelty. That choice is true wisdom. The narcissist will often translate your silence as a form of betrayal or abandonment. They will attempt to inflict guilt upon you. They will falsely accuse you of being heartless, emotionally cold, or purposely punishing them. But this defensive reaction reveals far more about their own sense of entitlement than it does about your actions. They expected you to forever tolerate their chaos. They mistakenly assumed that your natural empathy was an open invitation for them to continuously exploit you. But your chosen silence communicates clearly that that invitation has been withdrawn. It delivers the unspoken message: I am not your emotional hostage. I am not responsible for maintaining your feelings. I am no longer willing to be injured by your own unhealed emotional wounds. Many people find it hard to embrace silence because it feels foreign. It can feel like giving up. But this silence is absolutely not quitting. It is the courageous act of choosing a higher ground. It's a clear refusal to argue with a person who is determined to misunderstand you completely. It's a refusal to let yourself bleed for someone who won't stop intentionally cutting. Silence is your declaration: I do not owe you my thoughts when your only response is to twist my words. I do not owe you my presence when your goal is to always diminish my spirit. It's crucial to realize that this silence does not appear out of nowhere. It is earned. It is the inevitable result of countless conversations that led nowhere. It is the echo left by boundaries that were never once respected. It is the logical endpoint of a destructive cycle that actively refused to heal. And once you choose that silence, you must fiercely protect it, not with anger, but with unshakable conviction. Because the second you break it, you risk being dragged right back into the very toxic pattern you managed to escape. You risk painfully reopening emotional wounds that were just beginning to close. And worst of all, you risk betraying your own self just to calm down someone who was never actually concerned about your pain to begin with. This intentional quiet doesn't signify a lack of caring. It simply means you have stopped trying to persuade someone who clearly doesn't care about you or your feelings. It means you have firmly decided that your inner peace is more important than their temporary comfort. It means you've finally recognized that trying to explain yourself to someone dedicated to distorting your truth is a subtle form of self-abandonment. It means that from now on, your own healing takes precedence over needing their approval. And when that vital realization finally sinks deep into your core, you truly understand that silence is not something you use to harm them. It is fundamentally something you use to rescue yourself. Silence becomes your shield. It becomes the definitive boundary line you draw in the sand. It is your way of definitively stating, I am no longer participating in discussions that are only designed to confuse me, invalidate my feelings, or manipulate my actions. I am no longer handing out explanations to people who instantly twist my words into dangerous weapons. I am no longer accessible for emotional battles disguised as love, disguised as concern, or disguised as normal communication. Silence is not a betrayal of them. It is a commitment to your own well-being. Leaf. It is the powerful moment you realize that your peace of mind will no longer negotiate with chaos. And when you finally embrace that kind of resolute silence, you don't actually lose your voice. You truly begin to hear it for the first time. Control is the life force of the narcissist. It is not merely a preference. It is an absolute necessity. Their entire sense of self is built upon its maintenance. Every word they utter, every manipulative action they weave, every instance of the silent treatment they deploy, all of it originates from a deep, unconscious fear of being powerless. Control is what allows them to manage their environment, to hide their profound emotional fragility, and most critically, to sustain the illusion that they are superior and entirely unaffected. But when you deliberately choose silence, that entire illusion begins to slowly and systematically fall apart. The tight grip they once held starts to fracture. The narcissist maintains control not through brute force, but through psychological entanglement. They meticulously study your emotional landscape. They learn what triggers your reactions, what soothes you, what you deeply fear, and what you crave. They use intense charm and absolute confusion in perfectly equal measures. They orchestrate emotional highs that are invariably followed by crushing lows. This is a carefully calculated rhythm designed to constantly keep you off balance, always doubting yourself, always desperately seeking their approval. This is not a relationship. It is solely a power dynamic. And they sit comfortably at the top until you make the choice to step completely away, until you become silent. Your silence is far more than just the absence of words. It is critically the absence of their control. And that is the exact moment panic begins to take root within them. It might not be visible immediately. On the surface, they may appear completely indifferent or unbothered, but beneath that carefully constructed mask, their entire control structure begins to weaken significantly. You were the person who always responded to the late night text messages. You were the person who offered reassurance, gave explanations, defended their actions, cried, or begged them to understand. You were the dedicated emotional responder they relied on to validate their distorted sense of reality. Now, you are no longer playing that role. At first, they will try hard to provoke a reaction. They might send vague, cryptic messages, use mutual acquaintances to pass along veiled information, post indirect comments on social media, or suddenly become overwhelmingly remorseful or excessively generous. But none of this behavior is genuine. It is all simply bait. They aren't truly interested in healing or seeking understanding. They are solely interested in re-establishing control. And when the bait fails to work, when your silence holds steady, they begin to experience a feeling they work desperately to avoid helplessness. That feeling of helplessness is truly unbearable for them because it poses a direct and immediate threat to the false self they have so painstakingly built. That false self must always appear supremely confident, totally unbothered, and completely in control. But now that false self is under attack, not by you directly, but by the uncomfortable truth. The truth that you are no longer under their spell. And the truth that they are not as all-powerful as they have always believed, the truth that someone they once emotionally dominated has now effectively become untouchable. This deep loss of control is not just an inconvenience to them. It utterly destabilizes their entire sense of identity. Because they do not form relationships based on mutual respect. They form them for the sole purpose of controlling, extracting emotional supply, and dominating. And when that key dynamic ends, so does their ability to define themselves through your eyes. You were a constant source of supply, a mirror that faithfully reflected their delusions back to them. And without that mirror, they are harshly forced to confront their own inner emptiness. In their rising desperation, they may attempt new and different tactics. They may rapidly shift personas, moving from being the total victim to the great savior, or from the aggressor to the humble martyr. They might suddenly claim to understand everything, promise profound, lasting change, or beg you for one last chance. But again, this is not about genuine reconciliation. It is solely about re-establishing dominance. It's about immediately resetting the game so they can once again occupy the position of absolute control. Because as long as you are actively reacting, they perceive themselves as winning. But as long as you steadfastly remain silent, their entire elaborate strategy collapses completely. And then the internal chaos ensues. They become erratic, deeply disoriented, and unpredictable. The persistent lack of any response becomes utterly intolerable. Their manipulative tactics fail to land. Their core identity trembles. And the entire facade begins to slowly fall apart. Control is no longer something they possess. They are left floundering, desperately trying to make sense of a world where you no longer participate in their carefully constructed delusion. Every manipulative script they once effortlessly used now falls absolutely flat. Every psychological maneuver that was once guaranteed to trigger a reaction now dissolves instantly into silence. And that silence achieves something far more destructive than any kind of rage. It effectively dismantles their control from the inside out. The silence you have chosen may feel profoundly calm and empowering to you. But to the narcissist, it is nothing short of psychological warfare. Leaf, it is an unpredicted and catastrophic rupture in their control system. And that rupture breeds intense panic, not the kind of panic that comes from genuine love, sorrow, or regret, but the panic of someone rapidly losing their grip over a painstakingly manipulated illusion. What inevitably follows is a volatile, often explosive reaction, rage intertwined with sheer desperation, a terrifying storm of psychological instability that erupts from the cracks in their suddenly fractured mask. The narcissist cannot, under any circumstances, tolerate uncertainty. Your silence represents the ultimate unknown to them. It's not just your physical absence that destabilizes them. It's the fact that they no longer possess the blueprint for how to reach you, how to effectively manipulate you, or how to pull your emotional strings like they once did. For a person who bases their entire identity on domination, this is truly unbearable. So their mind frantically scrambles, searching for any possible way to regain what they sincerely believe they have lost. The false self, which was constructed meticulously to project confidence, superiority, and total control, begins to violently tremble. And the raw emotions that flood in when that control slips are primitive and utterly unfiltered intense rage and deep-seated fear. Their resulting rage is never accidental. It is a carefully calculated defense mechanism. Rage, for the narcissist, is used as a tool to intimidate, to instantly regain dominance, and to trigger paralyzing guilt or fear in their target. They lash out because they acutely sense that their power is no longer absolute. They attempt to shock you back into a state of submission. This is the stage where you might see aggressive, threatening texts, highly unpredictable behavior, or blatant attempts at public humiliation. They may ruthlessly insult, cruelly belittle, or even actively try to destroy your personal reputation. Because if they cannot secure your attention, They will gladly settle for your fear. And if they cannot successfully break your silence, they will desperately try to break your spirit. But beneath that overwhelming rage lies something even more dangerously potent, desperation. Desperation is not always loud. It is not always clearly visible. Sometimes it manifests as forced charm or a sudden overwhelming display of affection. It might be concealed by a flood of apologies, insincere tears, or a sudden dramatic willingness to work things out. But make no mistake, this is not genuine transformation. This is not remorse. It is panic disguised as repentance. It is the narcissist suddenly realizing that the one thing they always counted on, your reliable emotional responsiveness, is completely gone, and they are now at severe risk of being exposed as utterly powerless. This phase is where many victims are at their most vulnerable. The narcissist, fueled by desperation, becomes temporarily malleable. They manage to say all the right things, and they briefly act in all the right ways, but it is entirely an act. It's a strategy designed solely to reopen the door you so decisively closed. Because if they can just elicit a reaction, any kind of reaction, then the profound silence is broken and the game instantly resumes. That is truly all they require. One emotional opening, one split second of doubt, one tiny crack in your boundary, and they will wedge themselves forcefully back in. Not to genuinely fix anything, but to instantly reset the dynamic where they once again hold all the power. The panic they feel is also deeply rooted in their core identity. The narcissist absolutely needs a constant audience to affirm the grandiose persona they've so meticulously built. Your silence entirely removes the audience. It turns off the blinding spotlight. It brutally forces them into a kind of solitude they cannot tolerate, because in that solitude, they are confronted with the undeniable reality of who they are without someone to manipulate. And that reality is utterly terrifying to them. They are not strong. They are not self-sufficient. They are not whole. And in the prolonged absence of your reliable reactions, the mask begins to crumble completely. The volatile combination of intense rage and sheer desperation often leads to chaos. The narcissist may spiral into highly unpredictable behaviors, perhaps sabotaging others, lashing out violently at new targets, or rapidly shifting between extreme love, bombing, and devaluation with other people. Internally, they are utterly scrambling. They are desperately searching for a replacement, for new emotional supply, for anything at all that will restore the critical feeling of control they have lost. But nothing works quite the way you did. You were perfectly trained over time to respond in just the exact way. Your silence now feels like abandonment, but it goes even deeper than that. It feels like annihilation to them. They do not experience it as a physical distance. They experience it as a personal collapse. And when that internal collapse begins, they rage not just at you, but at the unbearable truth they have spent their entire lives skillfully avoiding. When a narcissist loses control, their immediate next line of defense is to seize control of the narrative, not the objective truth, but their own biased version of it. Because to a narcissist, perception is their only reality. And if they can no longer control your actions, they will ruthlessly try to control how others view you. This stage is as coldly calculated as it is venomous. It is not born from a simple misunderstanding. It is born from a deep-seated need for self-preservation. The narcissist immediately begins to spin completely false stories, severely distort real events, and then paint themselves as the sole innocent victim, all while painting you as the irrational aggressor. The smear campaign commences not as an act of revenge, but as a core strategy. They are not seeking justice. They are desperately seeking the complete restoration of the flawless image they've so carefully built. And you, by choosing to walk away silently, have become an immediate threat to that precious image. To maintain their illusion of superiority, they must completely discredit you. They must convincingly persuade others that you were unstable, toxic, overly dramatic, or deeply ungrateful. The main objective is to destroy your credibility so that if you ever do speak the truth, absolutely no one will believe you. They engage in subtle, insidious character assassination, carefully planting seeds of doubt in the minds of mutual friends, colleagues, and even family members. These insinuations might sound deceptively like concern. I'm genuinely worried about them. They might tell people that you're stupid, inherently ungrateful, or totally miserable. They might say things like, they haven't been quite the same recently. But be absolutely clear, this is pure manipulation. It is emotional propaganda designed to isolate and undermine you. The smear campaign often starts quietly, initially disguised as deep vulnerability. The narcissist may falsely claim they were emotionally abused, that they tried every possible thing to make it work, or that they were blindsided by your sudden and inexplicable change. They expertly adopt the language of the victim because it reliably garners sympathy. It successfully diverts all attention away from their own destructive behavior, and it allows them to maintain the false self that cannot, under any circumstances, tolerate genuine accountability. What makes this even more perilous is just how convincing they can truly be. Their manipulative charm doesn't vanish simply when the relationship ends. It often intensifies for the outside world. To people outside the dynamic, they appear composed, articulate, and often even emotionally intelligent. Meanwhile, you are left reeling, desperately trying to process the trauma, while others are being fed a version of reality that bears absolutely no resemblance to the truth. The narcissist ruthlessly weaponizes your silence at this stage. They frame your quietness as damning evidence of guilt. They twist it into proof that you are actively avoiding responsibility or secretly hiding something dark. And because you are not engaging in the same theatrical, emotional display they are, others can easily be fooled by their flawless performance. It instantly becomes a relentless social chess game, one you never agreed to play, but one they are fully determined to win at all costs. Your personal dignity, your carefully established boundaries, your deliberate decision to stay silent, all of these are spun into malicious narratives that solely serve their agenda. Smear campaigns are not just about damaging your reputation. They serve another vital purpose: to soothe the narcissist's own fragile ego. But by portraying themselves as the completely wronged party, they successfully get to bypass the uncomfortable truth that they were the actual architect of the relationship's collapse. They effectively shift all the blame so they never have to confront the real consequences of their own actions. And in doing so, they completely maintain their internal fantasy that they were good, loving, and profoundly misunderstood, and that you were the problem all along. This extensive distortion even extends into their new relationships. The next person in their life, often brought in quickly after your silence, will be given the exact same rewritten version of events. You will be ruthlessly described as unstable or toxic, and the narcissist will be painted as the long-suffering martyr who endured so much pain. This serves to both fast-track intimacy in the new relationship and simultaneously continue the narrative war against you. The new partner becomes both a captive audience and a simple pawn in their ongoing, desperate need for total control. What is especially insidious is how frequently the narcissist will accuse you of the very things they themselves did. This psychological projection is not accidental. It is fundamentally tactical. If they lied, they will vehemently claim that you were dishonest. If they manipulated, they will accuse you of gaslighting them. If they cruelly devalued you, they will insist that you were the one who was cold and neglectful. This tactic successfully confuses observers, especially those who were not close enough to see the hidden truth for themselves. It also ruthlessly forces you into a defensive position, a position they desperately hope you will take. Because if you react and lash out, they instantly win. If you actively fight back, they'll simply say, see, look how aggressive and irrational they are. The smear campaign is solely designed to either aggressively provoke you or entirely isolate you. Either result greatly benefits the narcissist. This stage is one of the most emotionally draining because it deeply violates your fundamental sense of justice. You are being openly lied about, severely misrepresented, and turned into a hostile caricature of yourself. But the narcissist doesn't care one bit about the truth. They only care about control. They care about maintaining their carefully crafted image. They care about remaining on the false throne they built, even if that throne is entirely made of lies. So they cleverly speak just enough truth to make the lie utterly believable. They highlight your minor flaws while completely ignoring their major betrayals. They present half stories as whole, complete truths, knowing full well that most people won't take the time to dig deeper. And in the intentional absence of your clear voice, their version aggressively dominates the conversation. Narcissism is not true confidence. It is not inner strength. It is not genuine superiority. At its absolute core, narcissism is a disguise, a mask meticulously crafted over many years of emotional repression, deep insecurity, and completely unhealed wounds. This mask is the tool that allows the narcissist to function in social situations, to charm, to lead, to dominate, and to seduce. It is a fabricated false self specifically designed to conceal the vulnerable, a terrified child underneath who has always believed that being authentic would inevitably lead to rejection, ridicule, or complete abandonment. But when you choose to go silent, when you effectively remove your energy, your precious attention, and your emotional engagement, that mask begins to irrevocably slip. And what lies underneath is not power, but profound emptiness. The narcissist only survives through constant external validation. Without it, they begin to decompose from the inside out. All their grandiosity, the false stories they relentlessly tell themselves about being special, superior, and invincible requires constant, never-ending reinforcement. When they lose control of someone who once perfectly mirrored their inflated sense of self, they no longer have access to the vital supply that propped up their entire identity. The cracks in their mask begin to visibly widen, and the emptiness they have worked so tirelessly to conceal finally starts to emerge. This emptiness is not a poetic metaphor. It is a measurable psychological void, an absence of a solid, cohesive selfhood. Narcissists fundamentally lack a stable, consistent inner identity. They don't genuinely know who they are outside of how other people respond to them. Their entire self-perception is externally sourced. So when you become silent, when you no longer validate, react, or participate in their emotional drama, you are not merely withholding attention. You are brutally confronting them with their deepest, darkest fear that they are absolutely nothing without someone else reflecting them back. What follows is a complete disintegration of the entire facade. The charming persona begins to visibly falter. The carefully measured confidence becomes brittle and fragile. The manipulations become more blatant, more obvious, and far more desperate. They may cycle wildly through different personas: hero, victim, savior, martyr, all in a frantic, losing attempt to find one that still effectively works. But when none of those temporary identities produce the same desired effect, the narcissist begins to lose control, not just over you, but terrifyingly over themselves. This painful unraveling doesn't lead to healing. It leads directly to chaos, because genuine healing would require self-awareness, personal accountability, and emotional depth. The very things the narcissist has spent a lifetime I'm actively avoiding. The harsh truth is, the narcissist doesn't know how to be real. They've worn the mask for such an extended period that they sincerely believe it is who they truly are. When it starts to crumble, they are left without a roadmap, without a compass, and without a sense of where the manipulative performance ends and the real person begins. Their behavior becomes increasingly reactive. You may observe them lash out more violently or spiral into deep isolation. They may try to fiercely overcompensate, posting grandiose, lauded boastful declarations on social media, immediately jumping into new relationships, or making highly impulsive decisions to regain some feeling of control. But these are never signs of recovery. They are clear signs of internal panic. They are scrambling desperately to rebuild the mask before anyone, especially themselves, can fully see what it was hiding all along. The emptiness underneath is filled with overwhelming shame, feelings of inadequacy, and a profound fear of insignificance. This is the exact emotional core the narcissist has tried to avoid at all costs. They are not simply unaware of their hollowness. They are absolutely terrified of it. It is the reason they constantly seek external attention, why they manipulate relentlessly, and why they cruelly devalue others. These destructive behaviors are not driven by genuine self-worth, but by an urgent, never-ending need to distract themselves from the vacuum within. Every single accomplishment, every compliment, every conquest is merely a temporary bandage over a deep, festering wound that never healed. When their mask finally slips, people around them begin to notice blatant inconsistencies. The charm that once seemed effortless now feels desperately forced. The lies become much easier to detect. The manipulation begins to feel like pure, frantic desperation. And for the very first time, the narcissist is at severe risk of being truly seen, not as the grand persona they projected, but as the fragile, incomplete person they truly are. This is a terrifying experience for them. It violently threatens the fragile structure they've built to protect themselves from reality. Without the mask, they are totally exposed, and without your reliable attention to feed their false identity, they are starving for significance in a world they no longer feel capable of confidently navigating. For the narcissist, avoidance is not just a habit, it is a way of life. They spend years, sometimes decades, constructing elaborate emotional and psychological defenses to guarantee they never have to confront their deepest fears. Every manipulation, every outright lie, every deflection is designed to prevent the confrontation of their own inadequacy, deep shame, and vulnerability. They build a polished, confident, and seemingly in control false self. But beneath that flawless exterior lies a fragile, emotionally undeveloped identity. They don't just actively avoid pain, they rigidly avoid truth, responsibility, and sincere self-reflection. But when you go silent, when you finally stop willingly feeding their destructive illusions, something profoundly dangerous happens in their internal world. The endless distractions suddenly vanish, the audience disappears completely, and they are left utterly alone with the very things they have spent their entire lives running from. Your silence is not just the simple absence of conversation. It is the profound absence of supply, of reaction, and of control. It removes the critical scaffolding they use to support their grandiose, fragile identity. When you stop responding, They can no longer use your emotions as their tools to regulate their own unstable self-worth. They can no longer extract admiration from your praise, nor deflect their own flaws through constant blame, shifting, and projection. The dynamic they entirely depended on, where you constantly questioned yourself while they remained completely above reproach, suddenly no longer exists. And in the vacuum your sustained silence creates, they are harshly forced to face the internal chaos within. This confrontation is not chosen. It is forcefully triggered. The narcissist does not willingly want to examine their own behavior. They do not voluntarily seek introspection. To them, admitting any fault or weakness feels exactly like annihilation. But when you forcefully remove your presence, when you disengage completely without offering any explanation or argument, you violently rob them of their ability to distract themselves with endless drama. You take away the emotional mirror they use to reflect a distorted, inflated sense of self. And in that mirror's painful absence, the image that stares back at them is one they no longer recognize or understand. This is precisely why your silence becomes truly unbearable to them. It is not about you simply being temporarily unavailable. It is about them being left with nothing left to reinforce the dangerous lie they live in. They are suddenly alone in the emotional house they constructed, and the walls begin to slowly, terrifyingly close in. Without your reactions, they begin to feel the inherent emptiness they have always carried, but persistently denied. The deep insecurities, the pervasive self-loathing, the guilt they buried deep, all of it begins to violently rise to the surface. And because they completely lack the necessary emotional tools to process those overwhelming feelings, they become entirely overloaded. They might not show this openly to the world. On the outside, they may appear perfectly composed, even totally indifferent. But internally, they are in a frantic spiral. The silence doesn't just annoy them, it utterly terrifies them. It cruelly forces them to sit with the reality they've always tried so hard to deny. They are not truly invincible. They are not always right. They are not above consequence. And for a person who has spent their entire life controlling others to avoid those exact paralyzing realizations, this forced confrontation feels exactly like psychological death. The silence makes them vividly remember every boundary they casually violated, every single moment they twisted the truth, every person they mercilessly hurt. But instead of reflecting with genuine humility, most narcissists will furiously double down on blame. It is infinitely easier for them to quickly rewrite the story than to try to genuinely rewrite themselves. But deep down, an irreparable crack has definitely formed. Whether they openly admit it or not, your resolute silence has planted a definitive seed of discomfort. They may frantically try to bury it, drown it in endless distractions, or smother it with new relationships and fresh attention. But that seed absolutely exists now. It is the very first terrifying taste of accountability, even if it is only faintly felt in the far background of their mind. There is also the profound fear of permanence. Narcissists often wrongly assume they can regain total control whenever they truly want to. They genuinely believe their charm, their manipulation, or their raw rage will always be enough to successfully bring you back. But your silence introduces a truly horrifying possibility. That you may be gone for good, that this time the destructive pattern has truly and unequivocally ended. And in that terrifying awareness, they are brutally forced to wrestle with a reality they've tried to keep perpetually out of reach. The realization that people can and will walk away from them, that their power is not absolute and total, and that relationships built purely on control are ultimately destined to collapse completely when the other person finally discovers their own powerful voice in quiet, resolute resistance. This particular stage is not dramatic in a highly theatrical sense. It is quietly, inwardly destructive. It is an internal implosion.